Hey guys, welcome back to our Maine homestead. So today is going to be the first in a series of videos all about sourdough basics. So sourdough 101. So today what I want to do is just take you from start to active on a sourdough starter made from scratch. The only ingredients that you need are an unbleached flour. So it doesn't matter if it's organic or not. It doesn't matter if it's whole wheat, all-purpose, bread flour. Some people do a gluten-free flour, so if you try that, let me know how successful you are, because I do know that it is possible to do gluten-free. I am using an all-purpose unbleached flour. So unbleached, that is the key. All the other things, organic or not, whatever, it doesn't matter. You just want to be able to stick with the same flour the whole way through, and you want to make sure that it's unbleached. So I love the King Arthur unbleached all-purpose flour. I have used well water in the past, but that has proven to not be very successful for me a lot of the times, more often than not. So what I have found works the best for me is just to buy some distilled water from the grocery store. So you just need these two ingredients, that's it. And you can make your own sourdough starter from scratch. Typically it takes less than a week. Sometimes it can take more or less time, just depending on what your environment is like. So depending on how warm your house is, depending on how humid your house is. And the fun thing about sourdough starter is that every one of them are just really unique. So it's unique to you and your environment, the kind of flour that you're using, that sort of thing. But the general idea of it is that it's actually pretty simple, and you just need to give it some time and give it some love. So those are the main things. So what we're going to do, without any scales, without any measuring, anything like that, we are going to essentially do like a 1-to-1 ratio of flour and water. And we're going to cluster feed. So what that means is that we'll do twice a day feedings. So typically like morning and night, generally about 12 hours from each other. But you can play around with that. It doesn't have to be exactly 12-hour feedings. But we are just going to cluster feed until we have a nice active starter that we can start baking breads with and all of that fun stuff. So let's go. Okay, so aside from your flour and your water, the materials that you'll need to get started with are just a small jar. I'm just using like a jelly jar here because we're going to start out with small quantities. So you don't need a giant jar, a giant bowl, anything like that. You do need some sort of breathable material that you can put on top. I'm going to use cheesecloth, but you could use like an old scrap of cotton t-shirt or something like that, as long as it's breathable so that air can get to it, but you're kind of keeping out like any dust and things that may fall into your sourdough starter. A spoon. One big myth that a lot of people think is that you can't use metal or rubber in your sourdough starters for mixing things like that, because a lot of people will say that you'll kill it. That's not true. Ask any sourdough expert. And then I just use like a little hair tie or something just to secure the cheesecloth on the top here. All right. So the first thing that I'm going to do is essentially a 1-to-1 ratio here, but what we're looking for is consistency, really. So I will show you exactly the consistency that I have when I mix up my first initial feeding here. And like I said, we're not using a scale, we're not using measurements, anything like that. It's typically about consistency. So in general, with a 1-to-1 ratio, I'm just going to do like a spoonful of flour. And then I have some distilled water here in a jar that I just typically will keep it just by the stove there, just so that it's room temperature, a little bit warmer, but not hot water. And then a spoonful of water. So I'll mix that up, and I will bring you over here to show you the consistency. Depending on what the consistency is and the consistency that I'm looking for, I will add just a touch more water or a touch of water at a time until I get the right consistency. So I might want to do just a smidge more water in this one. Not very much at all. And then just thoroughly mix it. Make sure that all of the flour is mixed in. It's very well mixed. And you're not going to have a lot in there, so don't worry about that. Okay, so here is the consistency. So it's not falling out of there. It's pretty thick. I'll get the spoon out here too to show you that, like, that is kind of the consistency that we're looking for. So pretty much just gluey, kind of a gluey consistency right now. As we go through this, the consistency that we'll be looking for is more like a really, really thick pancake batter. So not too stodgy, but enough that you can just kind of manipulate it. So anyways, that is our very first feeding. I'm going to take you along and show you every single feeding that I do until we get to an active starter. So that could be 2 days, could be 4 days, could be a week. I will take you along and show you every single feeding so that you can follow along as well and get your own active sourdough starter from scratch that you made yourself and that you can use to bake all of your sourdough bakes with. Now I'm just going to cover it with my breathable material, put a hair tie around the end of it, and then just let it sit right here on the counter. And it's just going to sit at room temp. Typically, sourdough starters like to be around 70-ish degrees, not really more than 75, not really less than 65. Mine like it a little bit cooler, so I do put it on the counter space that's furthest away from the stove. But if I put it all the way on the other side of the cabin where there's not a lot of heat coming from the stove, then I don't think it would do as well either, because it would probably be too cold over there. But by the stove, anywhere near the stove is too warm, and so my sourdough starters typically do not like that. So I'll just put it right here on the counter, and I will see you back for the next feeding. Good morning, everybody. So we are back to feed our sourdough starters for the second time. So this is day 2, our morning feeding. So we've got our sourdough starter here. It's looking pretty much like it did when we put it to bed last night, but I've got my my same unbleached all-purpose flour here, and then my distilled water. And so now, yesterday I told you to do a 1-to-1 ratio of flour and water. Now we're going to do a 1-to-1-to-1 ratio, sourdough starter, flour, and water. So here we go. Okay, so this morning I've got my sourdough starter here. It's got kind of a crusty little top on it, so that means that my sourdough starter probably needs a smidge more water than what I put into it yesterday, so that it doesn't dry out like that at the top. If you have this top is breaking up pretty easily, but if it was like a really hard crusty piece, I would just pull that off, throw it away, and continue to feed. But I'm just going to leave that in there because it's already breaking up. But right underneath that crusty top, it's still pretty stretchy and gluey in there. So I will get one more spoon out, because I'm pretty much going to do a spoonful of flour and a spoonful of water again, because that's about how much starter I have in there. So when you're feeding your starters, now we're just going to pretty much be doubling it with this 1-to-1-to-1 ratio. So I put a spoonful of flour, and then we'll do a spoonful of water, and then I'm going to drop a little bit more in there just for good measure, because my house is dry with this wood stove in here. And the whole reason I got that wooden spoon out was so that it wouldn't make so much noise when I was mixing it. But here I am using my metal spoon, so it is what it is. So mix it really well, very thoroughly. Okay, so now we're a little bit liquidier than yesterday. So I showed you how gluey it was yesterday and how it stuck to my spoon. Today I'm doing a little bit more water content in there just because mine dried out overnight. So now you can see it's move it around a little bit in there. And it's a happy veg starter for day 2. See you back for the next feeding. Okay, so this is our 3rd feeding. I don't see any bubbles in the top here, but if I look at it from the sides, I can see a couple of bubbles down here, just kind of along here. There's a little bubble right there. So you may start to see some bubble action in your starter. So what we're gonna do now is we're essentially going to double this. So whatever you've got, wherever your line is for your sourdough starter, you just wanna eyeball it and do about the same amount of flour, and then we'll put the water in to get the consistency we're looking for. So maybe 1 more spoonful here. So that looks to be about double. Can you see that? So my starter goes up to about here, and then my flour goes up to about here. So about double. We're going to pour some water in, get the right consistency, give it a good mix. Make sure that when you're mixing it, you're giving a real good mix, just so that it's well incorporated and so that you are incorporating some air and allowing air to get to even the starter on the bottom of the jar. So very thick pancake batter-esque consistency. So you can see here, my line is about right here now. So I'm going to actually place another hair tie on this so that I can watch and just see if I am having any growth with my sourdough starter yet. I don't expect it just yet because we're still very early in this process, but that is what I'm going to be looking for from here on out. So lots of bubbles and then some growth. That's what I'll be looking for. All right, so I put my breathable top back on, secured it with my hair tie, and then I'm gonna put another hair tie on here and just kind of keep it in line with the top of my sourdough starter in this jar so that I can, over time, see if I do have any growth here. So I'll check back in with you guys for our next feeding in the morning. Good morning, everybody, and welcome back to the kitchen for day 3, feed 4. So I'm going to try and show you guys that my sourdough did rise a little bit last night, and if this is focused enough, you might be able to see that there are some tiny little bubble actions going on here. That just means that your sourdough starter is catching all of this wild yeast from the kitchen and from your environment, and it is on its way to being a nice, healthy, active starter. Okay, I haven't talked much about discarding lately because we don't discard until we are about to feed, and wherever our line would be at when we are done feeding, if we don't have room to at least double in our jar or container, whatever you guys are using, then we need to discard some. If I were to feed my starter where the starter's right here and I'm gonna basically double it, it would put my starter up about here. So it wouldn't have very much room to grow, and we wanna be sure that we are giving it room to grow, ample room to grow. So in this case, I am going to start discarding some of this. And when I say discard, I'm actually just going to throw it in the trash. It's not active yet, so we're not going to use it for things like discard recipes or like a fermented snack for our chickens. There's a lot of things that you can do with active discard, but this is not active yet, so I'm just going to actually toss some of this into the trash can, and we're going to keep feeding until we get a nice active starter. Okay, so I'm probably just going to take a big heaping spoonful here and toss that into the garbage. Alright, let's see where my line is at now. Because like I said, after I feed, I want to be sure that my starter has room to at least double. So here we are now. And if we were to feed, we'll be about right here. and then that means our starter will have plenty of room to double. So we're gonna leave it just like this, only discarding that one big spoonful into the trash. The reason that I start out with a smaller jar as well is so that you're not using a ton of flour to feed and then you're having to discard a ton of starter. That just seems very wasteful to me. So until we get a nice active starter, I'm just gonna stay in this really tiny glass. And then I might move to something like this pint glass, which is what I keep my usual sourdough starter in. A pint glass full of active sourdough starter usually gets me a good loaf of bread. So that's why I stick with that pint jar. But while we're starting, we're gonna stay in a tiny glass here. And that looks to be about 2 spoonfuls of flour there. So do that. Here's my sourdough starter. Here is my flour. So I think I need a little bit more flour to make it that eyeballed 1-to-1 ratio. That looks better. So about there for sourdough starter, there for flour. All right, so we're gonna add some water till we get our good thick pancake batter consistency. So a little bit of water, and this is still my distilled water. I haven't changed water. It's a little dry, so I'm gonna add some more water, just a little bit. Emery Blake, what you doing over there, baby? Making sure we're incorporating air all the way down to the bottom. Make sure we are mixing up all of our flour really well. Alright, and then I'm going to scrape the sides down so I have a good idea of where my starter is starting at. Okay, so there's my starter line. I'm going to put my hair tie here so that I can keep an eye on where we are starting at. I'll show you your consistency is still a very gluey, thick pancake batter starter, and I haven't had any more trouble with it drying out, so this is the consistency that we are looking for each time. All right, I am back in the kitchen a little bit earlier than kind of my 12-hour time span that I've been trying to stick to, because we're about to go celebrate a little birthday dinner for me. And so Eddie's taking me out to dinner tonight, and I'm not sure what time we're gonna be home, so I figured go ahead and feed the sourdough starter before we go out tonight, rather than waiting too long, kind of thing. So I'm gonna try to see if I can show you guys. We've got a lot of little bubbles here, so we've got some fermentation going on. We've got some magic happening here. We've only had a little bit of growth. You can see the line is just above my hair tie here. So again, we're gonna do a discard, because if I fed double, we'd be close to the top, and then we don't have any room to grow. So I'm gonna discard some of this straight into the trash can. I'm not saving any of this discard yet. We will discuss saving the discard later on down the road, but I'm gonna discard, feed, probably back about to this line here, and then ta-da! Okay, so big heaping spoonful of this. Gonna go into the trash. I'm gonna scrape down the sides here so that I can eyeball how much flour I need to put in. Maybe discard just a little bit more. Okay, so now we are going to add our flour essentially back up to this hair tie line here. Yep, there we go. And I'm gonna put some water in here and give it a good stir. So you can see our consistency is still pretty gluey. That looks good, so I'm going to scrape the sides down, adjust my hair tie as needed to mark where we are starting at. And then we'll let it go for 12 more hours. So we're on to the next feeding. However, I'm in a different location because I'm actually house sitting right now and will be for the next week. I did bring along my sourdough starter so I could keep up with our feedings. So I'm gonna go ahead and discard a little bit of it and get my flour and water and go ahead and feed it. I do want to point out that I'm actually using just a canning lid, not the ring, because I don't want it to be airtight, but I'm using the lid on it now. Number one, because that's how I traveled with it so that it didn't spill or nothing got into it. But at this point, it's had enough time to have the air and the yeast from the air get into it and penetrate it and start the fermentation process. So by putting this more solid lid piece on here, I'm actually helping to trap in some of the moisture so that it stays nice and moist, and then also helping to trap those fermentation gases. So it does kind of help the fermentation process a little bit. I might be making that up, but that's how it goes in my mind. So I am hoping that within the next couple of days, we're gonna have a nice active starter that we can use to bake with. Good morning and welcome to our day 6 feeding. So last night I decided to actually bring the sourdough starter into the bedroom with Emery and I because the bedroom is actually a warmer spot in the house than the kitchen. So where we're homestead sitting, the house is pretty cool, but like I said, the bedroom is a very comfortable high 60s, low 70s. So that's why I brought the starter in there so that it could stay nice and warm. As you can see, we've got some good bubble action in there. We still have yet to activate and double in size, but we're on day 6, like I said, so I'm gonna go ahead and discard some of this, feed it, and check back in with you later. Discarded half, and so I'm gonna feed the sourdough starter for tonight, and then I'll see you guys back here in the morning. It is day 7. I'm going to show you some of the bubble action that I've got going on the top of my sourdough starter here. We are still getting lots and lots of bubble action, so we are in the fermentation process. However, we have yet to rise, double, get really active, so we're still not ready to bake bread yet, or bake anything with this just yet. So I know we just need to practice a little bit of patience, and we just need to keep feeding. So let's do it. Today is day 9. If you noticed, I didn't have a day 8 p.m. feeding. I honestly just forgot to do it last night, but this morning I woke up and my starter is definitely doubled. Here we go, nice and bubbly, doubled. So what I'm going to show you this morning is how to see if you have an active starter, because we checked off the first box. The first box was to get it nice and bubbly and to double in size. So We've checked that box. Now we're gonna do a couple of other little tests to see if we have a nice active starter that is ready to bake with yet. So first things first, I'm going to see if it pulls away from the sides, like very kind of slow and just like pulling very slowly away from the sides. If it's very liquidy and just running all over the place, it's not quite active enough. So first things first, let's see how it pulls. Yep, just slowly pulling away from the sides like. The second test, if we're not quite sure on that, that first test that we just did, second test is actually going to be to get a little glass of water, and we're going to take a spoonful of this, plop it into the water, and if it floats, it's active and ready to use. If it sinks, we're not ready yet. We just need to keep feeding, and we'll try again later. So next test, here we go. All right, so here's our glass. We're gonna take a spoonful of starter, drop it in here. Well, look at there. We have got a nice active starter that is ready to bake with. See how it just floats, it doesn't sink. If it wasn't active and ready to bake with, it would just sink straight to the bottom. There would be no question about it. So, all right, so there you have it. We've got a sourdough starter that we made from scratch, from start to active. Now we're ready to bake with it and just feed it on a every 24-hour schedule or so. If you don't want to feed it that often, or if you're not going to be baking a lot with it, you can put it into the refrigerator and feed it once a week or so, just depending on how often you're going to be baking with it. Yeah, so I really hope that you enjoyed this video. If you have any questions about doing a starter from scratch, please put those in the comment section below and I will get back to you ASAP. My next video is actually going to be showing you from start to finish how to use your sourdough starter and create an artisan sourdough loaf. It is a labor of love, so be prepared. Don't forget to subscribe, give this video a thumbs up, and I will see you guys back next time to do some baking.